Sometimes the smallest decisions, the ones you make in just a few seconds, end up changing everything. That morning felt ordinary. The kind of ordinary day where nothing important seems like it's going to happen. I had stopped at a small roadside diner just outside town. It was the kind of place that had probably been there for decades. The booths were worn but comfortable. The coffee smelled strong, and the waitresses called everyone honey, whether they knew you or not. Places like that always felt peaceful. No rushing crowds, no loud music, just quiet conversations and the occasional clatter of plates. I slid into a booth near the window and ordered coffee and eggs outside. The sky was gray, and the air had that cool early morning feeling that made the steam from the coffee look almost comforting. For a while, everything felt normal, until I noticed him. He was sitting alone 2 booths away from me. At first glance, he looked like just another older man grabbing breakfast, but something about him stood out. He was dressed simply. A worn jacket, plain shirt, and old boots that looked like they had seen a lot of miles. His hair was gray, cut short. His posture was straight, almost too straight. Like someone who had spent years standing at attention. He wasn't talking to anyone, he wasn't looking around much either. He just sat there quietly, drinking coffee and staring at the table like he was deep in thought. And for some reason, I couldn't stop noticing him. I didn't know why I kept glancing over at him. Maybe it was the way he carried himself. Even sitting down, he had this quiet presence about him. Not loud, not demanding, just steady. The waitress eventually brought his food, eggs, toast, and bacon. He thanked her politely, not with the rushed thanks people throw around, but with the kind of calm respect that felt genuine. I remember thinking, this guy seems like someone who lived an interesting life. But then something happened that changed the tone of the entire room. When he finished eating, the waitress placed the check on the table, and for the first time since he walked in, the man looked uncomfortable, not angry, not upset, just embarrassed. He picked up the receipt and studied it carefully. Then he slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small worn wallet, the kind that had clearly been used for years. He opened it, looked inside, then paused. His shoulders dropped slightly. That small movement was barely noticeable, but somehow it said everything. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't help it. The man quietly counted a few bills, then he checked the receipt again. He hesitated. Then he called the waitress over. When she came back, his voice was calm but a little strained. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm afraid I might have miscalculated." She leaned closer. He continued, "I thought I had enough with me, but it looks like I'm short." The waitress looked surprised, but she didn't seem angry, just a little unsure what to do. The man quickly added, "I can leave something here as collateral if you'd like. I'll come back and settle it later." There was a long pause. A few people nearby had started to notice. And that's when I saw the look on his face again. It wasn't pride. It wasn't frustration. It was something worse. Embarrassment. The quiet kind that people try very hard to hide. Something about that moment bothered me. Not because the bill was big. It wasn't. It was maybe $15. But the way he sat there, trying to handle the situation with dignity. That stuck with me. He wasn't begging. He wasn't asking for help. He was just trying not to make a scene. I looked down at my coffee for a second. Then I waved the waitress over quietly. When she came to my table, I spoke softly so the man wouldn't hear. "Add his check to mine." She looked surprised. "You sure?" I nodded. "Yeah. Just don't make it a big deal." She smiled slightly. "You got it." A few minutes later, she walked back to his table. I watched discreetly. She placed the receipt down and said something to him. He looked confused. Then she pointed subtly in my direction, and suddenly, the man turned and looked straight at me. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the diner. His expression wasn't what I expected. It wasn't relief. It wasn't excitement. It was surprise. The kind of surprise that comes when someone does something you weren't expecting at all. I gave him a small nod. Just a simple gesture that said, "Don't worry about it." He studied me for a moment, then slowly stood up and walked toward my table. The entire diner had gotten a little quieter. When he reached me, he extended his hand. His grip was firm. "Son," he said calmly, "that was a very kind thing you just did." I shrugged. It was nothing. But he shook his head slightly. No, he said. It wasn't nothing. There was something about the way he said it that made the moment feel important. Like this small interaction meant more than I realized. Then he added something that surprised me. You didn't have to do that. I smiled. Maybe not, I said. But it felt like the right thing to do. He studied me again. Then he gave a quiet nod. Well, he said, I appreciate it more than you know. And just when I thought the moment was over, the diner door opened and everything changed. The door swung open, letting in a gust of cold morning air. 3 men walked in at first. Nothing seemed unusual, but then I noticed something strange. The moment they stepped inside, they immediately spotted the older man standing at my table, and their reaction was instant. All 3 of them straightened up, their posture changed. Like soldiers snapping to attention. Then one of them spoke. Sir. The entire diner went quiet. And that's when I realized something about this man was very different from what I had assumed, but I still had no idea just how wrong I had been. The moment the 3 men stepped inside the diner, something about their reaction felt different. They weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but the way they stood, the way their shoulders straightened, it felt like something serious had just happened. The one in front spoke first. Sir. Just that single word, but it carried weight. The older man who had been standing beside my table slowly turned toward them. His expression didn't change much. If anything, he looked slightly uncomfortable, like someone who didn't enjoy being the center of attention. The man who spoke walked forward. Then something happened that made the entire diner fall silent. He stood up straighter and gave a sharp, respectful nod, not casual, not friendly, formal. The kind of respect you usually only see in military settings. The waitress froze beside the counter. 2 truck drivers at the end booth stopped talking. Even the cook leaned halfway out of the kitchen window to see what was going on. The man continued speaking. Sir, we've been looking for you. The older man sighed quietly. Relax, he said calmly. I'm just having breakfast. There was an awkward pause. Then the second man spoke. General Headquarters has been trying to reach you. The word hit the room like a dropped glass. General. I blinked. I honestly thought I had misheard. But then the third man said something that removed any doubt. 4-star General Mitchell. They said you might be here. Suddenly the entire diner felt different. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The waitress looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. One of the truck drivers slowly whispered to the other. Did he just say 4-star General? I looked back at the man standing beside my table. The same man who had quietly counted bills in his worn wallet. The same man who had looked embarrassed about a $15 diner check. And suddenly, everything about him made sense. The straight posture, the calm voice, the quiet dignity. General Mitchell looked slightly annoyed. Not angry, just uncomfortable with the attention. He turned toward the 3 men and lowered his voice. You didn't need to make a scene. Sorry, sir, the first man said. But they said it was important. General Mitchell nodded slowly. I'll handle it in a minute. Then something surprising happened. Instead of walking away with them, he turned back toward me, and the expression on his face had changed. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down again. The 3 men waited respectfully near the entrance. The entire diner was watching, but General Mitchell didn't seem to care. He folded his hands calmly on the table. You look confused, he said. I laughed awkwardly. That's one way to put it. He smiled slightly. Not a big smile, just the kind that appears for a moment and disappears just as quickly. Well, he said quietly, that tends to happen when people find out who I am. I shook my head. I didn't know. I know, he replied. That's what makes it interesting. The waitress slowly walked over and placed fresh coffee on the table. Her hands were shaking slightly. Thank you for your service, sir, she said. General Mitchell nodded politely. Thank you, ma'am. Then he looked back at me. You paid my bill. I shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. But he studied me carefully. You thought I was just an old man who forgot his wallet. Well, kind of. He leaned back slightly. And you helped anyway. I nodded. Yeah. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then he gave a quiet chuckle. You know something? What? That doesn't happen as often as people think. I hesitated for a moment before asking the obvious question. Can I ask something? Of course. Why were you here? I gestured around the small diner. This doesn't seem like the kind of place a 4-star general just randomly ends up. He smiled again, but this time the smile carried something deeper. Actually, he said, this diner is exactly why I was here. That caught me off guard. What do you mean? He picked up his coffee and took a slow sip. Then he looked around the room at the booths, the old counter, the worn floor. This place, he said quietly, belonged to someone I served with. The tone of his voice had changed. It wasn't sad, but it carried memory. Years ago, he continued, before any of the ranks, before the titles, we were just 2 young soldiers trying to survive a difficult deployment. The diner was completely silent now. Everyone was listening. He used to talk about this place all the time, the general said. Said that one day he'd leave the army, come home, and run the best diner in the county. He looked toward the kitchen. But he never got the chance. The general rested his hands on the table again. His name was Daniel Carter. The waitress gasped softly from behind the counter. That's my father, she said. General Mitchell nodded slowly. Yes, he said. I know. She looked shocked. You knew him? Knew him, he replied. We served together for 8 years. The room was completely silent now. The waitress stepped closer. My dad passed away 10 years ago. I heard, the general said gently. She swallowed. He always talked about the army, but he never told us much about the people he served with. General Mitchell nodded. That sounds like him. He looked back at me. Your small act of kindness today reminded me of him. I blinked. What do you mean? He leaned forward slightly. Daniel used to say something during our toughest days. What was it? He smiled faintly. He used to say, the world runs on small kindnesses. The big things only happen because of the small ones first. The general slowly stood up. He looked toward the waitress again. Your father once saved my life, he said calmly. Her eyes widened. During a mission years ago, he continued. I promised him something afterward. What? She asked. That if I ever had the chance, I would make sure his dream never disappeared. He gestured toward the diner. This place. The owner of the diner stepped out from the kitchen. A nervous middle-aged man wiping his hands on an apron. Sir, we're actually about to close this place next month. General Mitchell looked at him calmly. Not anymore. The man blinked. I'm sorry. The general reached into his jacket pocket and placed a card on the counter. I'll be investing in the renovation, he said. Full repairs. New equipment. Staff expansion. The room exploded with whispers. The owner stared at the card like it was unreal. You're serious? General Mitchell nodded. This diner stays open. The waitress had tears in her eyes. My dad would have loved that. The general smiled softly. Then it's settled. Before leaving, the general turned back toward me one more time. You know something? He said. What? You thought you were just paying for someone's breakfast. I nodded. Well, he continued, that small decision just helped save this entire diner. I stared at him. I didn't do that. He smiled. Yes, he said. You did. Then he extended his hand again, and this time, the handshake felt different, stronger, more meaningful. Thank you, he said as the general walked out of the diner with the 3 men behind him. The room slowly returned to normal, but something had changed. The waitress looked happier than I'd seen her all morning. The owner was already talking excitedly about repairs, and I sat there quietly finishing my coffee, thinking about something the general had said. The world runs on small kindnesses. That morning, I thought I was just paying for a stranger's breakfast, but sometimes, The smallest decisions end up changing more lives than you could ever imagine. And that's a lesson I'll never forget. You'd think the story ended when General Mitchell walked out of the diner. Honestly, that's what I thought too. I finished my coffee, paid my bill, and stepped outside into the cold morning air. The sky was still gray. Cars passed slowly along the highway. Everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. But inside my head, things felt different, and I kept replaying the moment in my mind. A few dollars, a small act. And suddenly a 4-star general had walked into my morning. It felt strange. Almost unreal. I stood beside my car for a moment before opening the door. That's when I heard someone behind me. Hey! I turned around. It was the waitress. The same woman whose father had owned the diner. She was still holding the receipt book in her hand. Her eyes looked slightly red. Not from sadness, from emotion. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Did you know who he was before you paid his bill?" I shook my head. "Not even close." She laughed quietly. "My dad always said people reveal their character in the smallest moments." She paused. "You revealed yours today." I didn't really know what to say to that, so I just smiled. Then she said something unexpected. "You should come back tomorrow." "Why?" She looked toward the diner. "Because General Mitchell asked about you." I didn't plan on coming back. Life gets busy. Work piles up. Days move on. But something about that moment stuck in my mind. So the next morning, I found myself pulling into the same diner parking lot again. The place looked busier than usual. More cars, more people. Inside, the atmosphere felt different too. Excited whispers, curious conversations. The owner stood near the counter talking energetically with someone on the phone. I slid into the same booth from the day before. The waitress spotted me almost immediately. She smiled. "I was hoping you'd come back. You said someone wanted to see me." She nodded toward the corner booth. And that's when I saw him again, General Mitchell, sitting quietly with a cup of coffee. Like nothing extraordinary had happened when I walked over. He gestured for me to sit. "You came back. You asked for me." He nodded. "That I did." There was a brief silence. Then he leaned back slightly. "Tell me something," he said. "What?" "Why did you help me yesterday?" I shrugged. "You looked like you needed help. But people notice that kind of thing all the time," he replied. "They just usually keep walking." I thought about that. I guess my parents raised me differently. That answer seemed to interest him. "Your parents," he repeated. "What did they do?" "My father ran a small repair shop," I said. "And my mother worked at the local school." He nodded slowly. "Good people." "They tried to be." Then he said something I didn't expect. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Daniel Carter." The waitress's father. General Mitchell stared out the window for a moment. "You know," he said quietly, "Daniel and I met when we were barely older than you." He paused. "We were stationed overseas during a very difficult mission." I leaned forward slightly. "You said he saved your life." The general nodded. "Yes. But that's not the whole story." The diner had grown quiet again. Even the owner seemed to slow down his conversation. "It happened during a night operation," he continued. "Things went wrong very quickly." His voice became slower. More careful. The kind of situation where panic spreads faster than logic. I didn't interrupt. "Daniel was the one who stayed calm." The general's expression softened. "He pulled 3 of us out of a situation none of you should have survived." 3. "Yes. Why did he never tell his family?" General Mitchell gave a sad smile. "Because that's who he was." The general tapped his fingers lightly on the table. "After that mission," he said, "I made him a promise." "What kind of promise?" "That if he ever needed anything, I would be there." "But he never asked?" "Never once." The waitress quietly placed fresh coffee on the table. She was listening too. "My father was like that," she said softly. The general nodded. "Yes." Then he looked around the diner again. He used to talk about this place all the time. He loved it, she replied. He wanted it to be a place where people felt welcome. The general smiled faintly. Well, yesterday I realized something. What? His dream was about to disappear. The diner owner walked over slowly. You heard about that? He asked. The general nodded. I did. The owner sighed. We've been struggling for years. Rising costs. I asked. That and something else. The owner lowered his voice. A developer has been trying to buy this land. The waitress frowned. They want to build another gas station. The general raised an eyebrow. And you were going to sell? The owner rubbed his neck. I didn't have much choice. There was silence for a moment. Then General Mitchell said something very calmly. That won't happen. The owner looked confused. What do you mean? The general leaned forward slightly. I've already spoken with my partners. Partners? Investors who believe in preserving places like this. The owner blinked. You're serious? Completely. The waitress covered her mouth in disbelief. You're saving the diner. The general shook his head. No, he looked at me. He is. Everyone turned toward me that I nearly spilled my coffee. Me? The general smiled. You reminded me why this place matters. A few minutes later the general stood up again. The three men from the day before entered the diner once more. But this time, no one seemed nervous, just respectful. Before leaving, the general turned toward me again. You know, he said, most people think big changes come from big actions. He paused. But they don't. What do they come from? He pointed toward the receipt on the table. That. A small diner built out a simple act. Kindness spreads, he continued. Sometimes in ways we never see. He extended his hand again, and for the second time, I shook hands with a 4-star general. 6 months passed. The diner changed, new paint, new booths. A larger kitchen. But the heart of the place stayed the same. The waitress still called everyone honey. Truck drivers still filled the corner tables, and on the wall near the entrance, there was a framed photo. Daniel Carter standing beside a much younger General Mitchell. Under the photo were simple words. Small kindnesses build a better world. Every time I visited, I remembered the morning that started it all. A quiet breakfast, an embarrassed veteran, and a $15 decision that changed far more than I ever expected. Life doesn't always give us dramatic moments where we know something important is happening. Most of the time, the moments that matter look small. Helping someone, listening to someone, showing respect. But sometimes, those tiny moments ripple outward, touching lives we never even see. That morning, I thought I was just paying for a stranger's breakfast. But what really happened was something much bigger. And it all started with one simple choice. To be kind.